Hey everyone, just a quick reminder that this is actually part 3 of the video and you can watch the other 2 in the video description or over here. I'm gonna try to link them both. Bridgertons by Julia Quinn. This is a historical romance series of kind of companion novels. I read the first book, The Duke and I, in February of 2023 as part of a romance reading experiment, and I had a great time with the book until one moment when the main character did something so unforgivable that it prompted me to drop the rating from 5 stars to 2 stars. Other than that, the writing of the author is phenomenal. She knows how to be funny, she knows how to write a scene that is gripping. I'm not a big romance fan, but I was into it until that moment. And I believe I have read one of the books from this series years back and I enjoyed it. I'm not sure which one. I think it was booktube, but I'm not 100% sure. But I'm gonna leave this here because I kind of want to continue with the series. I really like the writing style. It reminds me of Jane Austen, and that is something precious to me. And I will hope that her characters in later books won't be as terrible as the one from the first book. The Kiss Quoti by Helen Hoang, another series of adult romance companion novels, this one contemporary though. I read the first book, The Kiss Quotient, again in February for the same romance reading experiment, and it was okay, but it wasn't anything spectacular. I had issues with the male character. He was just infuriating at times, so I'm not gonna continue with the series. Not a big romance girl anyway. The Brown Sisters, I read Get a Life Chloe Brown for the same romance reading experiment, and it was a great book, but let me tell you, it was way spicier than what I initially anticipated. It had me fanning myself and clutching my imaginary pearls. So keep that in mind if you want to read it, but I highly recommend. It was so much fun, and I really liked her dynamic with her family, especially with her sisters and her grandma, and I really like her sister Dani Brown. So I'm going to continue with the series because I would like to see Dani's story as well, and I can always skip the more spicy scenes from these books. Dark Olympus by Katie Robert, I believe. This is an adult romance series of companion novels, again I believe based on mythology somewhat, but I DNF'd the first book, Neon Gods, it's like 20-30% because it was too much for me. Now these books aren't romance at all, they're just smut. There's no point in me lying to you right now, and honestly in the first book there was this kink that I really disliked, so I couldn't continue with the book, and I'm obviously not going to continue with the series. Definitely not for me. A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. Now, as a contrast to Throne of Glass, I really disliked this series. I read the first book, Akotar, a few years back and then reread it last year for a reading experiment, and it was okay, but I just don't buy the romance in this series. I had read partially the second book as well, and the other love interest I also don't care for. I find him switching his core character a little disturbing, and I really don't care. I think the fantasy of the series is kind of interesting, but I've never been one for fae. Truly, I have never had interest in them, and the more I read them, the more I figure out they're not my thing. So, although I am enjoying one of the author's series, this one I'm gonna DNF. Lightbringer by Brent Weeks. The first book from this series is The Black Prism, and I read it this year, and to be honest with you, I expected to love it, and I kind of hated it. I think the way the narrative was unfolding was very unbalanced and kind of repetitive. I found the book a little vulgar at times, which I really didn't appreciate. And to be honest with you, there was only one thing I cared about in this entire book, and that was the mystery between the two brothers. And if it wasn't for it, I probably would have DNF'd this series right now, but I'm gonna continue because I want to see what's gonna happen between the two of them, and if in the next book I still feel the same way, I'm gonna DNF it. The Chronicles of the Black Company by Glenn Cook. I read The Black Company earlier this year and I had a good time. It was very action-packed. It had a bit of an interesting writing style, kind of weird, so it wasn't a perfect book. I think I gave it 3.5 stars, but I had a good time, so I'm gonna continue with it. By the way, this is an adult fantasy series. God Killer by Hannah Kaner. This is a young adult fantasy duology as of right now, and I read the first book, God Killer, last year. Actually, I think the name of the series is is Fallen Gods or something like that. I think it was God Killer at the time, but they changed it. Never mind, it's not that important. The book was okay. I have a full review of it if you want to watch it. It wasn't tremendous, but it was interesting enough, and I'm going to continue with the series. The second book, Sunbringer, is supposed to come out in 2024, so I hope I'll be able to read it sometime soon. Themis Files by Sylvain Nouvel. The first book was Sleeping Giants, and I read it in 2023, and I loved it. I think I gave it 5 stars. It's such an interesting story, such a nice original concept, and the most interesting thing about it is that it's told entirely in video logs or interviews, just conversations, only dialogue pretty much, and the author managed to convey so much action and so much mystery only using this particular device that is very limiting, and I was very impressed. So I'm definitely going to continue with the series. It's an adult science fiction, and I highly recommend it if you haven't read it. Powder Mage by Brian McClellan. This is an adult fantasy series, and I read the first book, Promise of Blood, this year, and it's one of my favorite books of the year so far. I think I loved it. It was so interesting. It reminded me kind of a combination between Mistborn and First Law Trilogy, and I had such a great time with it that I immediately went and bought another book by the author from a different series because he impressed me so much. So I highly recommend. I haven't finished the series already, but I'm definitely going to continue with it. Highland Slayers. This is a series of historical romance companion novels by Julie Garwood, and I read the first one, The Secret was it, last year as part of my TBR game. I was required to, and I had a good time. I think the female main character was very interesting. I think the male main character was also kind of worthy of liking, and if you're into that kind of books, I think you're gonna enjoy that one. However, this is not my thing, and so I'm not gonna continue. I'm just gonna DNF it because I have no desire to continue reading that kind of books. Adventures of Tom and Huck by Mark Twain. I read The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn this year actually, but I have read them multiple times in my life, and I enjoy very much this author's writing. I have no plans, to be honest with you, to continue in this series. There are 2 more books that are centering Tom Sawyer. For now, I just don't feel like reading them. I enjoy the first 2 stories the way they are. I don't feel the need to know more about the character and about the things that happened to him afterwards, so I'm gonna DNF it, but with a lot of feelings of love and respect. Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. Margaret Rogerson hasn't written a book that I didn't love, honestly. And the premise of this series is so interesting to me. First of all, we have a tall female character, which probably doesn't matter to a lot of people, but to me, I love seeing that. And mind you, I am not tall. I am 5'3" for the people who use witchcraft measurements and 159 for the rest of the world. So you can see that I'm not tall at all, but I like seeing a tall female character in a book because it's not a very common occurrence, or maybe it is, but I haven't seen it that much. But then we have a magical library with books that are alive and can speak to you. It's phenomenal. We have a librarian, essentially, who is the main character. We have magic, we have dusty old manners. It's just lovely to me. So I love the first book, Sorcery of Thorns, which I read in 2023. And there is a novella that follows this story that came out in 2023 as well. I haven't read it yet, but I'm definitely gonna read it one day. Song of the Last Kingdom. What was that? Oh, all right. So, Song of the Last Kingdom by Amélie Wenjiao. I hope I'm pronouncing the author's name correctly. I read the first book. What was it? Song of Silver, Flame Like Night. What a beautiful name, isn't it? And the book cover was also very pretty. I read it as part of the second part of my Illumicrate reading challenge, which I actually dropped at some point because I was so bored by these books. Oh my God, I was losing my desire to read whatsoever, which was the case with this book as well, unfortunately, because while the setting could have been very interesting, the author managed to make it so boring. She managed to make the main character so insufferable. I had to DNF the book at like 40%. And I also think, personally, that the book was very derivative. So, unfortunately, I'm gonna DNF this series. And as far as I remember, the book was a young adult fantasy based on East Asian mythology. Forever Desert by Moses Ose Utomi. I read The Lies of the Ajungo this year and it came out in 2023. It's a novella that is told kind of like a fable and I quite enjoyed it. So I'm definitely going to continue with the series. I believe the second novella in this story is coming out in 2024. The Winnowing Flame by Jen Williams, was it? I read the first book, The Ninth Reign, earlier this year and it is gonna make my favorite books of 2023, let me tell you. Such a great book. It's an adult fantasy series, but kind of with elements of science fiction a little bit. And it's such an interesting premise. I couldn't possibly explain it here, but I highly recommend it. Every time I speak about this book, I feel as though it needs a larger audience because it's amazing. Definitely continuing with it. Definitely check it out if you like fantasy. The Jungle Book by Rudyard Kipling. I read The Jungle Book earlier this year for the first time in my life, mind you, because I had watched the adaptations but never actually read the book, and it was a nice little story and I had a good time, but I have no excitement and no desire to read the rest of the books from this series. I think there's only one. Either way, I'm not gonna continue, leaving the series with good feelings. Shiva Trilogy by Amish Tripathi. I hope I'm pronouncing the author's name correctly. I read the first book, The Immortals of Meluha, earlier this year at the recommendation of a friend, and while the story was very interesting, unfortunately the writing style was so dry and matter-of-facty, at least to my impression. I wasn't having a good time. The story didn't grip me. The pacing was weird. The characters were kind of removed from the reader, and so I'm not gonna continue with the series. It just doesn't excite me at all. Sigma Force by James Rollins. I read Sandstorm, the first book from the series, this year at the recommendation of a bookseller, and I had such a great time. It's kind of like Indiana Jones, but for team players, and there's so much nice action and so much archaeology and history and a little bit of an ambiguity as to whether there's a supernatural element. So I had a very good time. I'm going to continue with the series and I'm going to highly recommend it to you if you're into this kind of stuff. Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn by Tad Williams. I read The Dragonbone Chair in September, I think, and I really enjoyed it. It's an adult fantasy, classic fantasy, and I've been meaning to read it for so many years, and after reading The Dragonbone Chair, I can definitely tell you that it's a great read, and I'm definitely going to continue with it. The Dark Tower by Stephen King. Here, I was very disappointed by The Gunslinger. I read it in either September or October, I don't remember anymore, and it read like a hot mess made of fever dreams. The story didn't make absolutely any sense, and I found out later on that the author actually wrote it initially as a bunch of short stories that weren't necessarily connected, and then later on he tried to compile them into a cohesive story, and I understand that, but still, it's not good, okay? It's not good. I didn't like it, but a lot of people have told me that the rest of the series is much better, especially the second and the third book. They told me they're phenomenal, so I'm gonna give the series a chance, maybe another book, maybe another 2 books, and see how I feel about it. For now, it stays. Sword of Truth by Terry Goodkind. I read Wizard's First Rule 2 months ago, was it? And didn't like it. It started great, and then it went downhill very rapidly. The book is very derivative. The characters are very annoying, I will say. A lot of things happen that didn't need to happen. There are some things that were discussed in this book that I really had an issue with, and not just because they were discussed. Sometimes it's okay to discuss these things, but the way they were discussed. And I don't want to say it here because it's really unpleasant. So I'm not going to continue with the series. It was a chore to actually finish the first book. It was gigantic for no reason. I'm not going to spend time reading 14 more books like that, which is a shame because I really love the covers of these books. Short story masterpieces with a twist ending. This isn't necessarily a series, it's just 2 compilation of classic short stories, which I read the first volume this year and I really loved. So I'm gonna continue because I have the second one as well. I highly recommend it. Every single story made me think and feel. They were great. His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman. I read Northern Lights, the first book from the series, which is a young adult, marketed as young adult fantasy / science fiction series, and I really liked it. It was so much fun, but I wouldn't say it's for kids. The author says that he wrote it for all ages, but while there's a lot of whimsy in these books, there are a lot of very heavy and complex topics that I do believe a person needs to be of a certain age at least in order to be able to not only comprehend them and appreciate them, but also be okay with a lot of them. So I would recommend it, but not for kids, and I'm gonna continue with the series. First Law World. This is basically a series of standalone novels which were written in the First Law World, and I read Best Served Cold 2-3 months ago, but I didn't like Best Served Cold. As opposed to the First Law trilogy, I thought there were a lot of logical and moral and ethical inconsistencies in this book. I didn't like the main character. I didn't like how the story unfolded. I was kind of bored through a lot of it. So I'm going to continue obviously with the First Law World because I think Joel Abercrombie has an amazing writing style and he has proven to me that he can write amazing books. So maybe this one just wasn't for me, but I'm going to continue and see how the others are. Skunk and Badger by Amy Timberlake. This is a duology, I believe, of middle grade little fantasies, and I read Skunk and Badger because I bought it in my buying frenzy 2 years ago randomly, and then it came up in my TBR game recently, and that's why I read it. It wasn't my thing. It's not a bad book, it just definitely is not for me, and I'm definitely not continuing with this. The Dragon's Legacy by Deborah A. Wolfe. I'm struggling a little bit with this series. I started reading the first book, which carries the name The Dragon's Legacy, last month for readathon, and I still haven't finished it. I read all of 30% from it, and it's such a struggle to read through it. There are so many made-up words. Like in the first 3 chapters, there were over 20 made-up words. And yes, there is an appendix or whatever in the front with the made-up words and with the names and everything, but I can't just, constantly go back and forth. It breaks my reading experience and it makes it very difficult to read. So for now, it stays here. I'm gonna give the book a little bit more of a chance, maybe 10-20 more percent, and then we'll see what I'm gonna do. But for now, it kind of leans towards DNF. Flesh and False Gods by Chloe Gong. This is an adult fantasy romance series, the way I see it. I read the first book, Immortal Longings, was it last month? I don't know anymore. And I definitely didn't like it. I have a full review of the book. The plot didn't make sense. There was no proper chemistry between the characters. I'm not gonna continue with this series, absolutely not. The Shadow Demon Saga. This is a young adult kind of urban fantasy by Sarah Cannon, who is a self-published author, and she's here on YouTube. And I actually started watching her videos 2 years ago maybe, and I really like her. I like the way she speaks, I like the way she thinks, I like the way she coaches people. She's just a very nice person. But I had never read her books because she writes young adult fantasy, and I'm starting to realize that this is not for me, and I didn't want to read something that I knew I probably wouldn't like. But recently she was telling the story of how she started writing these books, and especially the first book, Beautiful Demons, and I got interested and I went on Amazon, and it's actually free. I think the first 3 books of the series are for free, provided by the author, and I got it as an ebook and I read it, and while it wasn't a masterpiece, it was interesting enough to make me want to continue with the series, so I'm gonna. The Atlas by Olivia Blake. Ooh, I read The Atlas 6 last month, and I DNF'd it actually at 40%. I was so bored. Oh my god. This is an adult, I think, dark academia fantasy that tells the story of a few individuals that are fighting for a spot in a secret society that deals with the Library of Alexandria and human knowledge in general. And oh my god, was I bored reading this. How can you make a book about the Library of Alexandria boring? I will never know. I didn't like the characters. They're all whiny and hypocritical, and the writing style of the author is so pretentious, and I already knew that. I already expected not to like it because I had read Alone with You in the Ether by the same author earlier this year, and it was exactly the same. Insufferable characters and very pretentious writing style. So I'm gonna DNF it. Mistland is the last on the list, and so far in this series there is only one book which I am currently reading, and I don't know what to think. Depends on how the book is gonna end. So far the story is interesting, but the author's writing style is abysmal. Again, the story is interesting enough to keep me going, so depending on how it's gonna end, how he's gonna wrap it up, I will decide whether to continue with the series, but still there is only one book so far, so it doesn't really matter. And that is it, my friends. For now, we have gone through all the 90-something series on the list, and we have DNF'd 34 out of those. So now we have 15 completed, 34 DNF'd, and 57 in progress. Well, it's better than it was before, right? So great success, I will say. And let's hope this is the last time I have to see this gigantic number in my in progress. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. It's not the usual type of content that I post here, but I had a lot of fun doing this. Let me know how you're doing with your series. Are you in a similar situation like myself, or do you have a system that actually works? I would be very curious to know and very grateful for any advice you can offer. Thank you so much for watching, and if you'd like to see the rest of my goals for 2024, check out this video. Bye!